All right, welcome back, everybody. I think this is part 4 of this series on how to do up one of these Shays. So far, we've done the new gears, we broke it in the motor, made sure all the operating was good in DC. So now we are ready to install a decoder. I'm gonna try to keep this video as short as possible. So one of the things we did in the last video is we took the motherboard out that comes from the factory and labeled all the wires. We also stripped all the wires. And I also went ahead and stripped all the wires for the decoder and everything ahead of time. So again, to try to keep this video as short as possible. I'm really not going to dilly-dally too much. One of the things you're going to need for this step is going to be the decoder itself. We'll talk more about that in a second. You need solder, soldering gun, lighter, wire strippers, and super glue. The decoder I use is by a company called Train Control Systems, or TCS, DCC. And this is the 1517 decoder right there. 1517 wow sound 101. The steam. It comes in steam and diesel. And it comes with a really big keep alive. You can see here, it's a really big capacitor that keeps the engine running for about 15 seconds after you remove it from the rail. So it really lets it get past some dirty sections of track. So this is a brand new decoder. These are the ones I use, wow sound decoders. And then the speaker I use is this guy here. This is a wow sound number 1717 speaker. I've already taken it out of the package and shortened the wires and stripped the wires for the sake of time, but I use a TCS wow sound number 1717 speaker for my decoder. So for my installs, especially on these Shays. Sometimes I use bigger speakers, sometimes I use smaller speakers, but I found this speaker has a crazy size to sound and sound quality ratio. It's a little magic speaker. I really don't know how they're able to put as much sound and technology into this little speaker, but it punches way above its weight class. So last video we labeled all the parts and all the wires and removed the other motherboard. So we're gonna get right into it. So on this wiring harness that comes from the decoder, there's a bunch of wires that you don't need. So all we need for this particular locomotive is black, white, gray, red, blue, and orange. We don't need green, yellow, or purple, this violet color. So what I did is I cut these wires a lot shorter, but not so short that we wouldn't be able to use them in the future if we decided we want to add more lighting effects, which is what these wires are for. If you want to add a flickering firebox, or you want to add a reverse light or other lighting features, that's what these wires are for. What I did on these wires is, because we don't use them, I cut them, but I also put a little bit of heat shrink on the end, because even though you cut the wire, there's still a little bit of exposed wires, and this is a die-cast tender, so in theory, it's possible that these cut wires could touch something and short it out, so it's best practice to add a little bit of heat shrink to the ends of the wires you don't use. I will admit I don't normally do this, but for the sake of the video, do as I say and not as I do. I wanted to set an example here that if you don't use these wires, put a little bit of heat shrink on it, and that'll save you some headaches in the future. Same thing for the other side of the wiring harness. One end goes in one end of the decoder and one goes the other. These two purple wires are for the speaker. These brown and pink wires, I honestly don't know what they do, but we don't use them, so I put a little extra, I leave enough wire to use it in the future if we need to, but I put a little bit of heat shrink there on the end. So the first thing we're going to do is actually get the speaker in place. This is where it goes in this setup. So just between those two posts. Again, if you cut those posts off, you'd be doing yourself a favor. You're buying yourself some room. And then tender, the speaker goes there, and the keep alive goes in front of it, just like that. And then the decoder goes on top of it. So what we're going to do is wire this, or glue this speaker in place. And the way I do that is I put a bead of super glue all the way around this speaker, and that forces all the sound to go down the bottom of the locomotive. So just like that. And push it for a couple seconds. All right. And I also got all my heat shrink already ready to go. So we're going to focus on the speaker first. So what you do is you twist these wires. I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you know how to solder. This is not going to be a how-to solder tutorial by any stretch of the imagination. But this is how I do it. I put these two wires together. I try to line up the ends of the wire. I kind of let them go kind of like that. One go one way and one go the other. And you twist them together. And then what I do, as you can see, that's probably quite a bit of wire exposed. I give it a little bit of a half bend, and I bend it over on itself. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? Is put heat shrink on. Don't do what I just did. I'm in a hurry. I'm trying to go fast. Put heat shrink on your wire before you twist them together. Now, same thing. Line those guys up. Have one go one way, have one go the other way. Try to maintain that. Twist them together. Alright. And I give it half bend over. Just like that. You can keep looking at that right there. Grab my soldering iron and a little bit of solder. We're just going to put a little bit of solder on there. And one of the speaker wires goes to this purple, and the other one also goes to purple on this end of the wiring harness. It doesn't matter which speaker wire goes to which purple wire. It doesn't matter. There's a little bit of stick up here. There we go. And then I bend the wire over, and I slide the heat shrink over that. And there's one of two ways you can shrink this heat shrink. You can either hover your soldering iron over it, or just give it a little bit hit of fire. And I like to pinch it. It does burn a little bit and it hurts, but sacrifices are meant to be made sometimes. Just to get that as tight as possible. All right, and then same thing on this other speaker wire. Put the heat shrink on. Twist these two guys together again. It doesn't matter which speaker wire you go to, which purple wire, but they both go to that purple wire. With a little bit of half bend over. Grab your soldering iron. All right. Bend that wire over. Slide the heat shrink over. Get a little fire. Squeeze it together. All right. And so this part of the wiring harness is done. I did usually this Keep Alive comes pre-wired to this part of the harness, but I shortened the wire a little bit. So that's why you see joints there. But other than that, it's just as it comes out of the factory. So the next thing we're going to do is probably this right side. So remember, left and right, these are the pickups. So I like to do, you can take these flags off and just do one at a time. Try not to take off. Try not to take more than one label off at a time. Just twisting these two wires together. Definitely go back and watch the previous video showing how we label these wires if you haven't already. I like to do right to red, just because red, right, red, they both start with R. So find this red, and then put your heat shrink on. Line those guys up just like we did the speaker, even though it's technically 3 wires now, but still same procedure. Twist those two together real good. Give it a little half bend over, just like that. All right. I'm not gonna hit it. Some solder. Should probably do this in a well ventilated area, but that's okay. All right, and we're going to slide this heat shrink over that connection, just like that. Because we have the room, I'm going to hit it just a little bit of fire, squeeze it together. So that's the right, and now we're going to do the left, which is going to go to black. So black and red are your pickups. Just twist those guys together. Take your black. Try to make sure you don't cross your wires. Just try to keep things kind of organized. So I'm isolating the black and making sure it's not crossing over any of the other wires. I'm actually going to make a little bit longer heat shrink. If I could find my scissors. Can't find them. It's okay. I can use these. Let's make a little bit longer heat shrink than I have there. Just because these are more wires going together. Make sure when you solder your connections, the heat shrink isn't too close to the connection, because it'll actually kind of, the heat will resonate through the wire and actually shrink the heat shrink before you want it to, and then you're not able to move it over the solder connection. So definitely make sure you keep your heat shrink out of the way while you're soldering. But I forgot to give that a little bit of a bend. I was wondering why I was on. Bend that over just a little bit, like that. All right, and same thing if you try to scoot the heat shrink down too fast, like immediately, the heat shrink will start to shrink up before you have a chance to slide it over that whole joint. We're gonna scoot this heat shrink down over that joint. Okay, hit that with a little bit of fire. Just like that. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is the motor. The motor is gray and orange. And if you remember from when we did these wires, we did those two wires together because it doesn't matter which one goes to which. If the engine runs in the wrong direction, there's a CV you can change in the settings on the decoder and make it run the correct direction. So when your throttle says forward, the engine goes forward. So you have a 50-50% chance of getting this right. So just do one motor lead to orange and one to gray. Really doesn't matter. Put your heat shrink on. Always remember to put your heat shrink on. I probably every time I do an install, there's at least once where I forget to do the heat shrink and I have to unsolder the connection. It's a pain. Twist those wires together. Again, this is the motor, and one of the leads goes to orange, one goes to gray on the decoder. Again, this is just the TCS wow sound decoders. I've really only ever done TCS wow sound decoders, so I couldn't tell you if other manufacturers have the same colors. I really don't know. I've only ever used wow sound decoders. I went to a show in Arizona right when I was getting back into the hobby, and TCS had a booth there and they gave me a demonstration. I'm like, sold. I will only ever use TCS wow sound decoders. I had seen enough to be impressed and convinced. I'm like, well, I guess I'm using wow sound decoders because they're just that good. Another thing you can do, right now there's quite a lot of wires going on, so I'm a little not really comfortable using the lighter to shrink this. You can just kind of hover your soldering iron over that joint, and that is enough to shrink that heat shrink, and then just give it a good squeeze. Okay, and then like I said, the other motor goes to orange. Again, we're doing this, try to keep your wires from crossing over and getting too complicated. Oh, put the heat shrink on, don't forget. See, I almost forgot. Line those guys up. Have one split them, have one go one way, have one go the other. While you split them way, twist them together. And I give it a little half fold over. All right, after this, we'll just have 2 more connections to do. Might be blocking the camera there, but technically you're supposed to use flux on these wires, but I use this is flux or rosin core solder. So there's flux inside the solder. I have been yelled at by my friend Kevin to use flux, but either I'm too lazy or never really. Not that I haven't seen a need, because he is right. You should use flux, but I mean it works fine. I've soldered hundreds of connections before without flux, and it worked out pretty well so far. But he is right. You should use it, but I don't. So again, it's just starting to get a little hairy in there, so I'm going to use the soldering iron to hover over the heat shrink to get that shrunk down. This really minimizes the chances of burning a wire you didn't mean to. All right, so all that's left is the positive and negative for the headlight. And if I can pull up my wiring diagram, let's see, blue is positive. So we're going to take this positive. When I did the motherboard, this is the one wire I didn't strip. So blue is your common wire for all the lighting. So if you had a headlight, marker lights, ditch lights, and a cab light, all of the positive leads of all those lights would go to this one blue light or blue wire on this wiring harness. Where'd it go? And then all your negative wires for each of those lighting effects would go to each one of these different function wires. Purple, yellow is for the reverse light, green is for like accessory lights, and white is for the headlight. Is that right? Yes. White is for the headlight. So all the positives of all those things would go to blue. So, I just did a locomotive install on a K27, and it had 4 or 5 lighting effects. I had like 8 wires going to this one blue wire off this decoder. It was quite the challenging connection, having 8 wires go to this one blue. All right, give that a little half fold. Get the heat shrink on already. Get this with a little bit of solder. Scoot this guy down. You can see a little bit of wire hanging out. That's because the heat shrink wasn't quite big enough. Scoot that down. I think I can use. All right. So the last one is kind of the trickiest one, if I'm being honest. You need to use, if your locomotive has an LED, you need to. I believe this wire sends out 12 volts. So if you have LEDs, they're usually only 3 3-volt LEDs. So that you need to put a resistor on each one of the function light leads. So this white one goes to the headlight, so I put a 1000 ohm resistor on this lead. Every single one of these would need a resistor if you had multiple lighting effects. Resistors are not directional, so you can put this resistor on either way. It doesn't matter as long as it's in the circuit. So this one I'm definitely going to need a bigger heat shrink. I like to use a really long, like you can see this is like 3/8 of an inch long strip on that wire. I'm going to need more heat shrink. And sometimes soldering this threaded wire to this solid resistor can be a little tricky sometimes. It just doesn't, obviously they don't twist together and hold themselves together, so I just kind of wrap it around like that. And then just like that. All right, flip that down, scoot this heat shrink over, and we just wired up a decoder. So once I shrink this heat shrink, we're not going to get the engine all bundled back up yet in this video. What I'm going to do is in the next video, I'm going to show you how I remove the pinstriping and the lettering from the tender. So I am going to test it in this video. So what we need to do is connect this big size. This is keyed, so this connector will only go in one direction. So make sure there's a little tooth right here that needs to align with the decoder. You push that on. Make sure you push. Try not to push on the wires, but you do have to make sure this is pushed in all the way. It always seems like it goes a little farther, like, oh, that's in all the way, and then you push it and it goes a little farther, and well, surely that's in. So then you push it more and it goes in more. So definitely make sure that's seated all the way. Same thing for the other side. There's a little key, so it'll only go in one direction. I try to use my fingernail to push on the side of the plug. Definitely try not to push on the wires. Same thing on this side. You're like, oh, that must be in, but you push a little more and it goes a little more. Okay, so we're going to plug in this DCC test track. Let that get all powered up. Try not to let anything touch the track, so I'm just going to kind of stack everything here in place for now. It's not going to be pretty, but we're just going to test to make sure everything works. All right. First track in the shot. Double check real quick to make sure everything's wired. There's no loose wires anywhere. There's nothing touching that it shouldn't be. Put it on. And hopefully you can hear that we have some sound. Let's see if the headlight works. Headlight works. You can hear the speaker making sound. And it should go forward. Hey, I wired the motor the right direction. It's going forward. Change directions. All right, so that's a successful install. So that will wrap it up for this video. I'm gonna change directions, turn the headlight back on. So in the next video, let me turn the bell off. Hold on. Is that off? Yes. No? No. There it goes. No. No. Come on. Sometimes the bells fade away so long you're not sure if you turned it off or not. All right, there it is. So, and like I said, in the next video, I'm going to show you how to take the pinstriping off the side of the locomotive and also the lettering off the tender. And then in the next video, we'll get everything buttoned up and I'll show you what sounds I use and what effects I use and get this thing all configured. So hopefully this video wasn't too long. We're at 24 minutes. Yeah, it was a little longer than I was hoping it would be, but I think that's about as fast as anyone's ever wired up a decoder. So thank you so much for watching. That'll wrap it up for this video. Make sure to leave any comments in the comment section below if you have any questions, and I'll catch you in part 5. Thanks so much for watching.